Yeah, I got you. I won't give you too much. You'll be fine.
Do y'all have a stand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't have the email chain.
Oh. Oh, I actually don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then
Or
it's,
I got it.
Oh, it says your email address was not found.
We did the same thing last time for some reason too.
Can you put in your email?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, I'll bring it.
Oh yeah, it's not like add ionoid. It's not like all one email.
Oh,
it's
it's
like add
yeah.
that. Oliver and Reese did that too.
Really?
Yeah. Also, you could get rid of GBS debate loves docs. Apparently that's like defunct.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Apparently they have like a new one.
Oh, on your paradigm it says there's no space.
Oh, is there not?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why.
It's like in red and everything too.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Figured out the source.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Settler colonialism is an ongoing political project that abstracts land, space, and work into possession, creating a cycle of desire that feeds off the insatiable desire to expand. Settler colonial research practices only commodify settlerism as a normalized practice through mimicry of expert knowledge that precludes effective modes of learning. Patel 14. The U.S. is an ongoing project about the settler colonialism, a contingent process of logic which relies on the land, resource, cultural practice, and good there can never be enough land to satisfy the logic of invasion, education, hence experience privatization to sustain land growth. People must be eliminated for settlers to replace in state-central massacres as a practice. Settler colonialism, its whole logic was that indigenous people must disappear in order to enable non-indigenous people to actually claim the land. Non-native people become inheritors of all that was indigenous land, resource, spirituality, and culture, raising the base of racial is found through historical manifestation. Gully Indians say the manner of organizing research around policy, federally sanctioned research contributed to construction of whiteness or third practice. This import slave labor and change or render human beings, child slavery, human being, humanity subjugated to property. The academy has sustained a problematic relationship with vulnerabilized communities, strengthened by the scholarship as well as the relationship between research and the researcher. The original innovation and intellectual properties, a fantastical Lockean delusion of structuring logic that greenlights the resolution's expansion of Anglo-European requirements is the continuation of the doctrine of terra nullius par excellence. The raw materials that allow for IPR in the modern world to be constructed are extracted from indigenous people, who are then violently erased as they serve no financial purpose. That is terra nullius. Doctrina 19. Liberty or property always begins with an act of rhetorical movement denies the claims of all who came before terra nullius. The doctrine applies to all Europeans in the New World. The musical composition that Europeans create are eligible for copyright, but African Caribbean elements are not used for appropriate rhythms, raw materials. They combine or rather finished goods that other people invented. Markets alone determine something's worth and whether it's creative or dignified life. Not just the inventor, the financier who would fund the production of such books. The rich who are willing to buy the invention is the fact that only lawsuits to extract crash not important because the extraction business creates a market for innovations that would Lockean titles without whom progress is all. And fixation of copyright law that devalues indigenous people's works, greenlights appropriation, and is fundamentally embedded in copyright. Simply fixing legal doctrines doesn't reverse the collective memories of abuse or disputed works within legal frameworks. Has solutions foster a culture of crackdown and rollback, political reconciliation, and genders false hope. Rather, engagement with settler institutions that concedes legitimacy to political apparatuses culpable in ongoing genocidal campaigns. Bedazzi and Cardenas. 24. Expanding the definition of fixation for words that affirm a law would vary minor disputes, fixation, reflection of authors care less about the word's justification to perpetuate dichotomy, the intention about the profound impact on indigenous communities, fixation as a component of the colonial state will initiate the desettling process, settler colonial exploitation, or betting U.S. copyright or serve a tool for regulation, control, manipulation, and meaning of work that is orally expressed, not transmitted, is not deemed worthy, protection, power, memory within oral society, conserved text, work that arose within collective experiences of slavery, fixation, devalues the ephemeral creativity. This exclusion provides the mechanism for exploitation and performance of those outside the settler state, and often can incorporate non-fixed work into their own claimed proprietary rights. The fixer is erroneously credited with being the original artist, not meant to be permanent. Often authors from dominant culture retell narratives. The retellings are protected under copyright, a byproduct of appropriation, legitimization of collective whitewash original memory that provides new, inaccurate, linear narrative, and categorizations of IPR are premised upon a myth of commercialization and access that is a distant dream as traditional knowledge remains incalculable into the grid of Western legal enforcement. Expansionism serves to broaden the public domain, resulting in histories of appropriation becoming justified under the guise of liberal fantasies of a better American future. Running horse and Colin at all 16. Access to law then becomes not only a question of application, but one of authorship. Western law and understand that indigenous people, even the appropriation of indigenous iconography, signifies assimilative practices such as complete legal inability to utilize IPRs for frequently explained ways and effect rather than the cause of participating in modern society. Western educational system attempt to instill a mechanistic and linear worldview in indigenous cultural context, reinforced by manifest destiny and senses of IPRs have been had. Our numerous colonization have played a significant role in the long history of export and construction of artifacts. Fundamental mismatch in Western IPR indigenous principles. IP laws are insufficient for representing indigenous interests. Thus, we affirm desettlement as a protection of indigenous traditional knowledge. The generative process of desettling fixation on the state of law and copyright is a true scholarship. Breaking practice is good. Anything else forces indigenous people into delusions of possible utopia. Badasi Cardenas 24. Parallels between education and law can formulate settler colonial practices within the legal system by settler expectation include what constitutes an acceptable argument or analysis whose narratives are violently settling rights, the disruption of colonized practices, explicit reworking, important to divorce the concept of decolonizing, desettling traditional classroom is structured as a higher the classroom would be deployed the professor and students in a classroom circle by placing the classroom in a marketable spatial configuration, deconstruct the hierarchical model, does not decolonize, remove some of the inequities placed by traditional models of settler colonial societies operate to continue the project of racial marginalization and suppression goals, desettling, to advance anti-colonial goals, calls into question, settler perspective, desettling works to entangle the entrenched practices and practices of colonizing capitalist thinking, and all ethical orientation must reconcile the settler state within the classroom, the academy, and the research process at every opportunity. The forefronting an analytic of desettlement as a viable praxis for decolonization. Big Art O'Leary Turner 20. Decolonization will be long and short. What is decolonization of the worthy goal? We have to choose constant help students get to a place where they can engage with decolonial lens and participate in a more generative, ecological, equitable approach to practice. Take a repetition, ongoing process, reward bit by bit, desettle and single insurance practices. Desettling is a disruption of colonized practices which take numerous forms, but large and small. One act of desettling, not totally decolonization, is still valuable to be taken. And indoctrinating indigenous people to re-enter a system which is the antithesis of communal knowledge establishes the state as an authority of proprietorship. Why must native nations ask for ownership of their land to clarify knowledge which is theirs in the first place? Running horse and Colin at all 16. We did not find a case where an indigenous people or nation filed for registration with an IP line exhaustion is relatively recent and expensive. It would be unrealistic to expect indigenous population to feel systematically uncomfortable to utilize it. Why would go to someone else? Says permission was always our town. Those websites advertise spiritual properties were discovered by native people who viewed these products owned by indigenous population. I'm discussing with indigenous elders from the tribe. There was overall distrust that IPR would indeed protect the people's rights. They knew how to use it the right way. Could help them. The statement is a perspective vastly different than one that designates such plants and resources that can be discovered by those who can afford it under an IPR model. Thus, we should always refuse the recognition of the settler state as the locus of power and instead turn away to create processes of self-realization and external interrogation. This antagonistic approach to recognition of power is critical in the process of decolonization. Belonging to crimes and seed 17. Experience of the disrespect with the politics of recognition struggles not so far as expansion of extant regime, but of refusal. They reject the idea of self-realization. Indigenous people can be achieved through recognition confirmed by the state to see as legitimate. The injuries inflicted upon indigenous communities do not need to motivate social order of inclusion. The experience of disrespect often into question the regime in some way to evade the exit. They refuse of dual quality, this generative alternative, subjectivity and field recognition, and dead to the settler discovery of human freedom, diminished and subordinate. And fear cannot be sovereign colonized, but only from oneself. Freedom comes turning away from the compulsion to improvement towards self-recognition. Self-recognition also to attend to oneself and one's own culture with at stake is recognition that settler state is a primary locus of power, refusing offers of clear recognition that emanate from institutions. Power is inherently colonial, immediately unsettles the power, exposed to patriarchy, now partiality and contingency of recognition, unsettling the powerful can be a radical project recognition through the rules of consent and sanction, dispossession, and render freedom impossible. These stories reveal the strength and the precarity of colonial power. They all draw an alternative indigenous intersubjectivity. They might not need or want recognition from the other, or which engage with the other with a very but attentive attitude. These insights point to a need for agonistic approaches, recognition if we are interested in decolonization. Through our conversations of the law, debate decides what is valuable. That means that we decide what is valuable here. All discourse is vital in shaping behaviors and beliefs, and where the resolutions of affirmation of inbuilt racialized hierarchies creates whitewashed ideological chambers and memorialize the settlers' doctrine of copyright law, rather meaning making, as understood by the space prior to desettling, is to colonize knowledge that disadvantages communal traditions to those less financially able, and people who attempt to retool the resolution to speak about inequities. Rosenblatt 19. By defining conscious law, forms the discourse that whose power, behaviors, and beliefs identifies the behavior that admirable, that shameful, provides official social context that shapes activity and brands that is legitimate or illegitimate, implies value and grants and copyright implicitly announced. Some have enough value that should be encouraged through the mechanism of market exclusivity, gives authors control over the discourse and communication impact is compounded by the fact that copyright law grants property law and their rights. Those distinctions systematically empower those who can afford to memorialize the work hierarchy of expression artificially, entirely artificial. The reality of communication meaning is the result of a mixture of influences from seeker, urine, and cultural intermediaries. All the power speakers have been hearers, all hearers bring their own meanings. The process of authorship is always a dialogue. Leo creates power dynamic which some can own and therefore control the power tools of meaning making. Insistent copyright is only best. Promotes equality, harm, and culture, creative culture, hierarchy, value tends to disadvantage those whose backgrounds like financial authority, socioeconomic, creative factors want to use words to talk back to inequality. Those references denies the existence of merit outside this colonized affirming, resulting in a systematic negation of the other person and affirming settling as a quotidian challenge every academic act feeds our consciousness towards action. Simon 20. It is dangerous to construe of unsettling to outwards toward the settler institution without individuals in action because simultaneously experience the destruction of their own cognition. Externally oriented action become vehicles of radical war awakeness will actually recenter settlers regarding individuals whom indigenous issues and settler colonialism are relatively new. We may desperately seek ways to distance themselves from guilt or moral stress to be unsettled. Emotional discomfort provides guidance for incorporating solidarity. Cut the card of solidarity.
It's not in there.
Cool. Good. Give me 1 sec to get a sip of water. I'm good.
Okay. If we win, the federal government protecting IPR is bad. Do we win?
No.
Why?
We think the threshold of the negative is to be burdened with rejoinder of the affirmative. This can be done through disproving the affirmative method.
Okay, so to be clear, the affirmative does not defend the USFG increasing protection.
We
of
would
IPR.
say that we increase a protection of IPR for
By the
indigenous
USFG?
folk. However, the instrumentality of the resolution, aka United States federal government, can be reinterpreted. Obviously,
Reinterpreted? How do you
You'll
interpret?
read your own interpretation in the one NC. Obviously, not
Okay,
even
our
policy
interpret
apps
that
determine.
USFG must do.
Well,
string
when you
protection
read a
of
T
IPR.
violation, then I'll know what you want the United States.
I'm telling you now,
to be.
our interp is USFG should stringent protection of IPR, and AFs and negs need not be burdened with rejoinder against those AFs.
Yeah, those are words. What cards? Like, that's
Well,
not a definition.
Okay,
That's
Ellsworth, US legal.
Thanks.
Like, under that interp, what is your other explanation of what resolution means?
Yeah, we think the United States federal government is we the people, like in the Constitution.
We the
We
people,
think that
okay.
the way that the United States federal government can be accessed is obviously different based on like
Okay.
your lived experience. The way that the United States federal government has treated you, politics can be shaped from
Okay.
quotidian
If you
practices.
don't like change any government policy, your running horse Collins evidence talks about like people being denied IPR, like indigenous people. How does the AF solve that?
Yeah, so we have said there's multiple ways, right? One is through discourse. Our Rosenblatt evidence is phenomenal about the ways in which discourse shapes the ways that we interact with violence and interact with subjectivities.
Okay, so like
in
us
here.
talking in here is going to solve the PTAB's decision of whether to deny or
Well,
improve.
it's
indigenous
about like
people.
the extent to what debate can do, right? Obviously, debate can never pass any actual
Yeah,
policy,
obviously. So you
but
can't
what
solve this
debate
impact.
can't, it doesn't pass governmental policies. What it can do is shape the way that we think in here. Desettlement is a process of changing the
Okay,
way that we
great.
learn.
I understand
and changing
that.
the
Why
way
does that
we
solve
talk
this
about
impact, which is about the
Yeah.
PTAB denying people
Well,
copyright?
no, the running horse 16 evidence is specific to the way that ecological frameworks and aka traditional knowledge frameworks of indigenous people cannot be realized under copyright law, etc.
Right,
or
and
how-
our talking in here is going to do nothing to change
Well,
that.
no, the Rosenblatt 19 evidence says that pointing out the inconsistencies within copyright doctrine in educational spaces, that card is like straight gas, actually. It says that creates like dissonance within the mind, and when we go out and choose to invest into
Okay,
politics.
so to be clear, the internal link is we change the way we think,
Well, I think
and
you're
then
like
we work
you're,
for the
you're
PTAB,
thinking
and
about
then we approve
solvency.
and
Yeah,
deny.
okay. So you're thinking about solvency in like the completely wrong way, right? You're like, how can like we specifically get the U.S. government to pass a
Yeah, because
policy?
you said it's about
That's
our
not
discourse,
what we're talking
and what we
about.
can, what quote,
Exactly.
what debate
Yeah.
can do.
Like, not only will this create better policymakers in the future, like the forms of clash that will allow, but B, it also provides solvency on the
Whoa,
level
okay.
of
How do you create
survival
new
strategies.
how do you make new policymakers?
Well, that was the whole internal link explanation for
so
the
just
last
like we
two
become
process.
policymakers, then
Well,
we approve
I don't
indigenous
understand what the
people
point
in
of
IPR.
talking about China war is if you don't prevent China war. You
Okay,
hope
well,
that someday
I mean,
you would
so
pass
you
okay.
agree you don't
policy.
prevent your impacts then?
Well, you
No,
wouldn't
we
prevent
don't.
any impact, but we can prevent impact on a discursive level, which is all the stuff in cross-checks and the Rosenblatt evidence.
One in C was sent like a minute ago. It's 6 off and then case. Can you give me the stamp?
Oh.
I'll let you make it. Yeah.
I'm good, TJ. Are you?
One sec, it's just downloading. Okay, I'm good.
Ion, you good?
First off, top calendar, the negative need number 24 minutes to not defend the federal government's strengthening protection of IPR. 1. Resolve proceeding a colon indicates a legislative form. Electorate 81 in low colon separates the word resolve from the resolution. Resolve that this committee favor new legislation 2. The USFG denotes the 3 branches, U.S. Legal 16, USFG 3 branches, legislature, executive, judiciary, powers not assigned to the Fed. Are the states 3 should recommend a course of action. Trigger 2K, common meaning of should recommends action 4. Strength of protection must make IP easier to acquire, broaden the scope, or provide remedies for infringement. Mandel, I can structure a database of every court opinion or statute concerning patent copyright or trademark. The primary variables whether action strengthen or weaken IP protection. Strengthen versus weaken refers to protection for the rights under decision that make it easier to acquire IP rights. Broaden the scope of IP protection, make it easier to prove for strengthen remedies for infringement. All strengthen protection. Our interpretation is key to preserve any semblance of a limited, refutable, and predictable topic. Vote neg. 1. Fairness. Both sides depend on it, and it's a basis for understanding what their impacts, like suffering and racism, have any basis in morality. It's paradoxical to disregard it. They'll go for dropped arguments, do line by line, and they'd be upset if the judge rendered an incorrect decision, proving their investment into its value. It precedes their offense. It's strong to predict academic engagement, and its consistent application decision-making processes checks against exhaustion to feed a moral agency and system. Global is key 22. Procedural fairness was so strong, predictive academic engagement as well. Burnout. Procedural fairness decreases burnout, which includes a low self-efficacy and exhaustion. A sense of lack of meaning. Procedural fairness increases trust in science. Studies where mainly Western countries polled relatively recent political transformations to its value for treatment. Our results highlight the importance of fairness from procedurally just decision-making processes. 2 is clash. Policy debate outclasses punditry because it forces people to answer arguments. Studies prove that debate encourages high school students towards self-improvement. The 2AC can't concede debate changes our such activities. Our argument is that iterative testing in the long run produces content agnostic skills, not what we argue about changes how we think. And
Skip that.
actually, strike everything I said about Clash. Go to Clog. The next off is the Clog DA. IPR litigation is slow, expensive, and hostile. Lead 15. Disputes arise from interest methods for resolving disputes into litigation. 2. Expensive. 2. Still employed in IP disputes. Docket overload prevents efficient resolution of climate litigation. That decks enforcement of climate policy to reduce climate change. Colonnade 21. Judiciary essential role in climate change observed as guardians in environmental context. Climate litigation is controversial and important role in shaping a rule of law around climate change. Warming causes extinction. A19. Climate causing extinction due to non-linearity, cascading feedbacks. The multiplicative thresholds and tipping points. Adaptability limit make extinction likely. Extinction outweighs 1. It's the largest impact. Everyone on the planet dies. They suffer from the effects of war, starvation, and environmental destruction. 2 is irreversible. Once we die, there's no coming back. Capcom. The 1AC's commitment to subcultural radicalism cede power to neoliberalism by abandoning organizing in favor of self-marginalizing shortcuts. This ensures extinction-level climate change. The alternative is to build democratic socialism through a mass political base. Taylor 21. I was a socialist in the era I read and intended process. You cannot be a social alone. If you want people to believe we can transform society, we should demonstrate we can run organization of peoples who withstand survival and since the slave trade, or colonization, capitalism, perpetuated racial hierarchies were divided when the states could not be hired. Too often the climate crisis is here. Fires flood. Heat, everyone's reaches melting. Ice, crop failures, extinction, refugee, Iota, warming, Alberta. Matters, racial cap, condemn, contradict, planetary survival, and contempt billions of premature death. We need them social to meet the scales of crises. Racial victory, solidarity, bonds that move us together, and common that propel. The tricky part is ensuring we're not showing a solution to the voice. Easier make radical pronouncements. What's hard is figuring out how to get attraction. Occupy what's powerful but refuse demands of the state. People extrapolate that left to shoot against it. They electoral them entirely. I disagree. It's not enough to name what's wrong. We need to figure out what may be possible. We have to be committed to mass politics. We don't want to just be a radical subculture because we can't win that way. There are no shortcuts. Too many groups pursue reform without being accountable to a base and do enormous operational advocates mistake. Orange films despite publicity's the power. What differentiates all dairies that it has a material dimension. It's not just a feeling or after organizing. We can nurture internally. We don't have any resources, which is why we have to learn from each other. From other movements, ruling classes needed a scorched earth campaign against solidarity. Institutionability can sustain solidarity. I had no idea how to organize 15 other people. So joining a campaign was outside of my experience. It's easier. Tear down then to build. We don't want to dismantle, rebuild solidarity. States to state grants people. Direct states in society. Democratizing control over resources. Solidarity extends both across space and also across time to commerce to come that. This is a real meaning of solidarity forever. And the next stuff is Wu Wei. Vote neg for a counter method of Wu Wei when the mind is far we come remote. Tao Chen in the 8 writes, I built a cottage right in the realm of men, yet there was no noise from Magna or horse. There's some true significance here. I want to expand on it, but have lost words. Let's linger on. Tao Chen in 7. Our span is short, desires are many, with stars and signs the day and month arrive, and all by custom loves today's name. The quiet life has indeed many joys. There is something achieved in just lingering on. Next off is frame subtraction. Interpretation, the negatives burden to negate any of the ass frames, including 3C frames and cross-sex moments. We can agree with the vast majority of the app, but you can still vote neg. Only conditional tests of limited agreement incentivize narrow testing if their specific claims require to disprove the entire app versus extreme impactors that lack nuance and political utility. 1. Endorse the 1C, but capitalized land with a lowercase doesn't honor its cultural significance, causes spiritual erasure of indigenous laws systems. Clark 15. Lands capitalism is assigned respect, honor, indigenize, signing a place, environment, land when capitalizing encourages larger cultural concerns. This can be complex, and that includes physical, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional characteristics, and all systems ultimately embedded in land connect to all relations. Land-based practice cannot be practiced without the land. 2. Contemplate the 1AC. Don't affirm it. Even if the external response has a role, you shouldn't affirm the 1AC. You should contemplate it. The choice of affirmation prefigures ethical orientation, poses a soft possibility of provision and contingency, and expresses the difference. Connolly, 98. To change corporal is supposed to open a room for revised utterances. This is where micropolitics says of its words. These radical practices are crucial. They're responsible because they are resist politics to become taxes or experimental. They work in ways that open up new possibilities. I'm not sure I can care that a stance must prefigure the ethic, rather enables a possibility. It disarms objections. One might, for instance, adopt a conception of being and then respond with politics that suppresses difference. The response you fashion depends on all upon the whatever you cultivate. The word affirmed thus plays a lot of weight in an ethic drawing. New substance from Nietzsche and Foucault, contingency fragility never disappears. From ethics, case 1, vote negative on presumption D. Settlement does nothing to change dominant discourse and structures they perpetuate. Settler colonialism, their challenge to structures of power is no means spilling outside of debate, which is necessary for them to solve any of their impacts about settler domination, since the infant setting off of institutional engagement is the basis for the continual marginalization of indigenous communities. But their belief that it does is cruel optimism, which turns case 2. Settler colonialism is a poor structuring analytic that forecloses dynamic and contingent relations that ally its pioneer velocity. 16. Settler colonialism is an analytic subsidiary as much as it does analysis of settler colonies for close international and relational possibilities. Settler colonialism appears self-contained rather than constitutional with other forms of power when taken up as an analytic without regard to specificity or material relations to structure, benefits, knowledge, developing its scholastic debate over identity reduced to structural insistence and divorce from contingency, emphasizing structural limits. Settler colonialism into descriptive typology. One imagery might become viable if we thought from other spatial forms we might be able to better grasp simultaneously this position that do not easily fit into a settler native binary. Can you give me no base? 3. Justifying something isn't the same as causing it. Grabs a card at 15. There are good reasons securitizations fail to gain traction, leave short of a causal theory that takes proper account of politics, satisfactions, and remain as to condition however words transform and social order speech actually to magical hallucination. Unclear why some security moves are resonate while others are ignored. References fail to alien condition of one cut of the audience is stripped of all agency speaking security. They also sweep away politics security is not crowded. Spending priorities nor does declaring something national security guarantee. Funded. Go back to framework. Only our offense debate cannot change our subjectivities. Argumentation causes echo chambers turning their offense. No ways. 20 million maintain that argumentative situations prove our beliefs. Arguments are not efficient to change minds. Real life people do not like to change about entrenched beliefs, so when they are confronted with arguments that contradict, they look away or discard the argument. Arguments trigger much of reasoning whereby one rejects that. With those arguments about engaging argumentation often means to cement identity rather come closer to the truth. That people will gravitate toward sources that confirm their opinions. Dissenting voices not sufficient to consider all sides of a question. Polarization often arises instead of bringing parties together. Argumentation drawing them apart. Alertness can also come about. The million account is idealized. It's not suitable recommendations for agents. And go back to case 4. Settler colonialism is ongoing but not a structure. Jeffrey 17. There's difference in ongoing and structure. The former gestures to repetitions of violence, latter emphasis colonizations, ratio their political, ethical, and motivations highlighted over one of the engaged colonizations is ongoing. It generates possibilities for folks in our intersectional and integral center. Initial peoples who are still here resisting, affirming that violence is intrinsic or established as a feature of society. It has been embedded in structure. Thus, for closing exchange and possibilities over emphasis on structures obscures the colonialism's historicity. The investigation of settler colonialism inadvertently center non-natives and reproduce colonial violence. Expectation that prioritize disciplinary methods over political critique facilitate centering non-natives politically motivated. Work must be invested in social transformation. 5. Projecting a unified and omnipresent settler common sense produces a civilization that makes indigenous liberation impossible. Buzzword 18. There's a narrative that says, and attempts at the structural perspective closes down imagining social and political transformation. There's a ontological discrepancy where, well, the only solution to decolonization, which the paradigm renders unachievable to elucidate the logical elimination is overcoming forces or operational weakness, whereby the social is simply there, omnipresent and manifest, even when it appears not. The scholar is not only read into the situation there is unsolvable and can only ever be categorical. Fatalism is common critique for reifying settler colonialism have been a structure where colonial relations are inevitable, not only just actually erase contingency, market contingency.
I sent the no vice card.
Okay.
And the full correct topicality show.
You good?
Yeah.
Alright, your 4th off, can you explain it?
Is that the Wu Wei?
Yes.
Well, it's a form of lingering on our subjectivities and understanding our place in the universe.
What's the argument? How does it link to the affirmative?
Well, I think that is a form of contemplation that Wu Wei and the method would disagree with. We have to instead linger on that question and understand how it affects
Why should the judge vote negative?
How we are interconnected with like spiritual energies and the way that this implicates the case.
How? Like, why should the judge vote negative?
For a method of Wu Wei.
Yeah, okay, what is the method? Just like contemplating?
To linger on.
Linger
I think
on, does that mean like
that pretty
spiritual
clear.
connection?
Huh?
Does that mean like spiritual connection?
What do you mean by spiritual connection?
You said the word, not me.
I didn't say
You
connection.
said
I said
spiritual
spiritual
connection.
energies. To understand and linger on the way those spiritual energies work and interact with each other.
Okay, how does
what does it mean to interact with spiritual energy? And why can't indigenous no.
It's not in terms of the case, right?
Okay,
spiritual
that's
energy
great.
is
We
just
can
kind of the
move on.
relations that structure
Sure.
how we
Okay.
view
Yeah. I'm
society,
good.
and the way we understand each other.
The
right?
pick.
So like Russell's relation to that spiritual energy.
Your Clark evidence, the pick. Where does it say that saying land without an uppercase L is bad? I just see something that says that saying it with an uppercase L might be good.
It's a sign of
Do you want me to
respect.
answer that? Yeah.
No, that's good.
All right, your on case, your Krebs evidence. How is this offense?
Well, it's defense because it's
Okay,
on
sure.
case, and the 1AC has said that our representations could shape our realities, and that was a lot of 1AC cross-ex. It answers that claim by saying that justifying something or those representations won't actually cause it in the real world.
What this just talks about, like how talking about certain things doesn't like literally affect politics. Like how is that?
I mean, like 1AC cross-ex was explaining how we can go and become like patent and copyright examiners.
What? Okay. So
Oh,
this
no,
is
And,
just
like,
about
and
West
also, I
Coast.
think your last 1AC card also substantiates that claim
sure.
that this card index.
All right. On case fairness, is this like this specific round like unfairness in this round?
Well, it's model. Well,
It is a model.
it's just in this round.
It's just this round.
Yes.
Okay, in that case, all of your fairness offense about how like people will leave the Klukowski evidence seems to be like a model of debate that is unfair, causing people to leave. How is it like? Do you think your Klukowski evidence says if we're unfair this round,
Yeah.
you might leave?
It's about procedural unfairness. So if Ion makes a procedurally unfair decision, then yes, it increases our propensity to quit.
It
and
increases your
our-
propensity. I'm
Yes.
talking about the actual impact.
Yes. And
What
the
is the
impact
threshold for the
it
impact?
raises the likelihood that we burn out. So yes,
It
that is-
raises the likelihood that
Yes,
you burn out.
all impacts are probabilistic. If one impact goes
Right,
up and
right,
it's
but
a
like-
bad thing, then we access our impact.
Ion
okay,
voting
so
affirmative cannot
if
solve
impacts
all
are
set of colonialism.
probabilistic,
It makes it more.
does that mean that like if we prove that we in some way contribute to an impact or increase the propensity for that impact to be solved? we
Obviously,
should
there's
get
like a
it?
scale, like it's a sliding scale.
Yeah,
Right?
it
More
is.
burnout is worse. If you increase the likelihood of burnout, that's probably bad.
Okay, sure. Then the oh, you didn't read the other one. Then no way. Okay.
Wait, let me see if I got that card. And then we'll start.
Oh,
Wait,
you
I
sent
got
like the completely
the-
new T shell. And so at the
Yeah.
bottom it should be the no way.
Wait.
Yeah, that. Right there. Just,
Oh, okay.
all right, start 10.
One sec. Let me see 3. Got a card. Don't need that.
You can run restaurant.
Okay.
Y'all didn't read the noise cat evidence, right?
The what?
Noise cat. Last card.
No.
Okay. Okay. 140 take 141 taken.
Okay. So 8.
8.
I have 8, 9. It's probably 8, 9.
Yeah, we can go with whenever you want.
Okay, let me know when y'all get it. is like a really interesting classroom structure.
Yeah, we were in here last round too. It's like
Like,
circular.
yeah.
Wait, this is a clash.
I think so.
It's an English class, I think.
Yeah, we got some lit fest 20.
So there's Socratic seminar circles.
Socratic
Yeah.
seminars.
We hit NK in this room last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How'd that go? Oh, y'all beat them on the
Ballot cake?
academia case.
Settler Academy. Yeah.
Oh, right, because you were with Eden. I was thinking, like, what did you do with Russell? Like, oh, like the Henderson 15 stuff?
No,
Like Settler
it was more
Academy?
about. It was like a wake file.
Nice. Does she like Wake?
I haven't really talked to her,
Oh.
but I think she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, when she came to work week.
She came to work week for MBA?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, nice.
She's still coaching for us a little bit.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick Lapp is too, right?
Yes.
I still haven't gotten the 2AC really.
That should be fine. It'll be case, cap, court clog, the frame subtraction, the counterplan, framework. Does anyone need that again?
We're good.
Okay. The topic is a forgotten land. There's no home and no future for indigenous people because the innovation that intellectual property requires is built from pillaged materials. That's Dr. 19. The imposition of copyright or patent law codifies in America's historical subjugation and ownership over property that never was ours. Therefore, you should theorize the topic is the ultimate hypocrisy and vote affirmative for desettling academia. Here's a groundbreaking practice reformulating expectations of what it means to protect knowledge as Cardano's 24 and Rosenblatt 19 framework provides uniqueness, and there are 3 impacts. A, appropriation of the public extracts legalize indigenous knowledge to chase profit. B, marginalization as indigenous individuals are unable to access lawmaking. C is captivity where traditional knowledge is forgotten and the legacy of indigenous innovation is assimilated into IP law. You should set the threshold of an app ballot, its desirability. Any other model makes the app written untenable, which is a takeout to presumption, but also it's a double standard. No one ever vote negative presumption because the ballot doesn't pass the plan. It should only be if the method is a good idea. 2, the app is still a unique introduction into existing movements, both research and desettling our material proven by examples like the Pohotan people writing songs and different notations to stop the West from copywriting music. You should map that fugitivity into debate and topic as a rejection of the resolution as a threshold of solvency. 1 and C2, settler colonialism is not self-contained, which is what this card says, which is what we are impact turning. It is not self-contained. There are other theories of power, but set calls what structures IPR law in the United States federal government. 1 and C3, Rosenblatt 19 takes it out. Reps do shape reality, cross-apply the overview. What we do in here shapes the way we think about people and ideas. Otherwise, there are no skills and no point to debating about anything. 1 and C4, there's no reason engaging in colonization there's no reason engaging versus against colonization is bad. It's power attack. Intersectional entanglements can be understood with settler colonialism. There's also no trade-off established in this card. 1 and C5, the bus bridge card is just a good one. You can cross-apply the overview. And 2, extend Patel 14 in order to cohere society and innovation. Indigenous people must be killed. The creation of blood quantum law, settler schools, the denial of voting and citizenship, so that any gains must be theorized from a desettling practice by indigenous knowledge thinkers. That's Big Heart. O'Leary 20, Cap 1, case outweighs in terms. Extinction is now, not 2050. For indigenous people, Flint, Michigan, Resland, shrinking native are getting commodified into by corporations. So uniqueness is on our side against the law. 2, permutation due both social organizing absent and ethical orientation towards desettlement fails. Rather, class differences are an incorrect indicator of how sociality and resistance is formed. Prefer a racial interpretation. Anything else trades off with energy required to join the party. That's Balaton crimes instead. 17, link. No bright line for materiality or political telos is words and moments of desettling are always acts of resistance. Moving against what has been established and reclaiming the land is their own form of telos. The alternative to hold this explanation to a high threshold. They can't explain how they organize or why debate is key. There's 2, dis as 1, demobilization, discarding every movement that is smaller trades off with joining the party. 2, rationality, the idea that you must rationalize indigenous violence is symptomatic of economic rationality, diverts energy away from pulp to whiteness, and an example why their model debate can never understand indigenous violence, which you can cross-apply to D. The core clog decide 1, no link. We don't cause the creation of more suits in the patent right or copyright system, so core clog is impossible. We'll redefine protection below, but also 2, link. Turn the system is bad. If core clog happens, maybe more people will be incentivized to find communal agreements to protect property and stop looking towards courts as a solution. 3, core clog internal links are non-unique for indigenous people because they cannot access the system. Anyways, 4, futurity decide their extension scenario is a classic tactic of whiteness that imagines hypothetical cost-benefit analysis distracts us from the death of native bodies. Now, that was the work done on Cap. Frame subtraction. 1. Counter-interpretation. Weigh the app's entire political strategy against the negative political strategy as the sum of the app strategy and picked out portions. When any solves the deficit, takes out the frames. There's 2 net benefits. A. Rev clash. Weighing frames in a vacuum is asinine because it justifies picking out a cap bad from a cap K app and moots any value to testing, which is what their cards say is good. B. Intellectual responsibility. When any solves the deficit, takes out a pick because combining frames is incompatible with the app, creates false hope that that keeps people's wheels internally spinning. 1. The first frame, it doesn't say lowercase L is bad. There's no reason why it's not respectful. Perm do both solves and there's no trade-off and no risk causal claiming the card. 2. Affirmation is key. That's Big O'Leary 20. If revision is key, then they have to provide an alternative method that is better to affirm. There's no bright line between contemplation versus affirmation. You can also contemplate then affirm, which means the perm do the off then the pick resolves it, and you can also cross apply that to the counter plan about that. And the counter plan 1, perm do both, no opportunity cost as of the 1 and C. 2. If lingering on our subjectivity is key, we'll concede that. Debate obviously shapes that. And 3. Original energy doesn't mean anything in relation to the affirmative. The 1 AC cross was a yap fest, and you cannot understand what that has to do with the affirmative. Framework 1. We meet desettling is the best practice to protect indigenous intellectual property. In no way read Mandela 18. He advocates for strengthening of IP rights, to solidifying the rights of those who are already property owners, which would always take out, which would always stop access for indigenous people because they do not own property currently because res lands also are not their own. Also 2. Form is content. 1% versus their model upholds settler colonialism is sufficient to vote as an interruption. 3. Counter-interpretation. Debate should engage in critical discussion centered around intellectual property protection and the law. Rev debates are best. 23. Non-digitalized assumptions. Fiat is an arbitrary action called conclusion for the conclusion option with the word fiat is not only the debate over the way to do consolidation of class beyond the truth or even say rev shift the paradigm for policy non-state theory performance material discourse marketing academic and everyday settings important debates between non-state based for example scholarly conversation outside of policy making. Rev makes debates analysis nuance black and force everything and right within why dominant actions with sanctions limits of the resolution far too restricted the work we do requires new limits. Every rep challenges white debate to think and pushes us to consider the limits of debate around power and ways might counteract the way in which white debate has laid claim to the limits of debate itself. And 4. There's descriptive censorship to set up the level of interpretation and the pursuit of consensus or equity white supremacy. And this activity relies on stasis points and normative resolution readings as hegemonic modalities of enclosure. Lead 21. All communication requires interpretation. All research is interpretive and academic are divided into ideological camps which interpret battles over hermeneutics instructions. The interpreters are not conscious of the precepts of control over interpretation and white power that regulates the interpreted part, ensuring the meanings of supporting the dominant group are legitimately focused on the original type. Fails to complex hermeneutics to exclude critical approaches. Ultimately, dialogue becomes sites of repression due to pursuit of consensus to trigger racial ideologies that continue to high grade. Those are uncomfortable with critical interpretation because unfortunate normative they resort to attempt to discredit the work by questioning the implementation of methods, evoking norms, methodology, conceal the problem around interpreting and maintaining white supremacy through methodological science and communication is distorted by white supremacy social structure, turning discursive exchange into everyday forms of racialized violence. Communication is what the structure of white supremacy is reproduced. And 5. They dropped assignment 20 evidence. The ask must always come first because something is a quotidian challenge. Every academic act and feed our consciousness towards action which can outweigh any fairness violation. Obviously, individual in question will experience discomfort when you read the app. That's why voting against framework provides uniqueness for app solvency. Fairness 1. It's just an internal link. Competition doesn't spill up externally and there's no terminal or external impact. Unfairness 2. It's inevitable. Intrinsic accessibility, funding, coaching, skill differential, etc. All thump an equal playing field. 3. That means you should always prioritize a model of structural that tries to mitigate structural unfairness. Paradox 1. It makes no sense. We haven't said fairness is bad writ large. We've read specific indicts to certain practices in debate, not following speech times. The Glozeski evidence is also really bad. 1. No burnout internal link term. K debate empirically has increased minority engagement. For example, UDLs and KVK debate in college. 2. Good ground solves unfairness. That's a counter interpretation. 3. Leaving the activities already non-unique for indigenous debaters. That's an argument why debaters use to preserve an anti-settler preserve a settler model of debate that benefits them. Predictability limits. 1. The counter interpretation solves natural limits on K-lib basis. Also check. 2. Predictability is based on community consensus. For example, head and cap good or moving from hypo testing to whole res now. 3. Ground is a better internal link to engagement because you still have something to read. 4. Statistically decide conceptions of stasis of the limits revolves around whiteness as described in neutrality breeds racial anxieties whenever minority debaters try to change the debate space using critical literature. Mercury 20. It's because possible radio gender identity policy successful and identify as destructing divisive theory within the terms of racial neoliberalism. It's possible to say we really don't know that they're confronting the canon's earlier tendencies, not to say part of challenges, find ways to unlearn the canon. Cut the card at canon. Ground 1, it's always non-unique to our app. Topical debates still encourage a race to the margins to find the smallest and most obscure plan actions. 2, the ground list above. I'm going to give a ground list. You can read things against our theory of power. You can also indict and read other methods of indigenous resistance. You can read other critical interpretations. You can also impact turn certain parts of the app. You can read frame subtraction. You can read picks, etc. 3, it's not concessionary. Switch side debate means you're prepared either way. And switch side debate itself, well, they didn't read switch side debate or a TDA. That means that there's actually no way to access our literature under a model of policy-focused debate. But also, 1, the app's a unique set of contestation because you're forced to debate why IPR itself and the resolution is settlerist. Every round is key. That's Rosenblatt 19 in Steinman. 2, switch side debate is inherently reactionary to the affirmative. Indigenous people people are never allowed to start with the wrongness of the resolution, rather they must be reactionary, and it becomes a burden to find flaws with the affirmatives. If there is a TVA 1, you can cross-apply feel bad. The Sakino evidence that papers over radical work required to achieve solutions, which is the whole point of 1AC cross-checks, to disprove the way that the method of the affirmative can actually lead to political engagement outside, which is why they want to discredit that, even though that is the way that radical work actually happens in the real world too. It doesn't solve any form. Often teams read process counter plans politics, which obviously obfuscates the content of indigenous knowledge. And I'm gonna read another card. There's a civility dissent. Their model disqualifies legal personality through the pretense of a universal definition that advances civilizing mission. Mother. 20. Civilization as exclusion of non-Western identity legal personality law is not concerned with the relation to domination. Oh my god, I can't scroll on your computer. But just get the card, domination.
We'll wait for my third.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna start.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Can you explain the we meet argument?
Yeah. So A, we think that desettlement is a way of protecting intellectual property rights. for
How? What
individuals.
IPR does it protect?
Traditional knowledge frameworks. I think that's the running heart 16 of it.
What do you mean it protects traditional knowledge frameworks?
Yeah, for example, by saying that the fixation requirement in copyright doctrine right now is bad, and instead indigenous people should be allowed to choose the way that they can engage with IPR.
Okay, so you have said something the state is doing an IPR is bad.
Well,
Tell
we've
me
said
why
the
this can't be a TVA.
We've said that the state is like incalculable for indigenous violence. Like the state
Okay, no.
can't even
You read
understand why
an
certain
article.
things
You
are
read an
bad.
article that advocates topical action from the state, and then you read a ton of state bad offense. Can you resolve this
Well,
contradiction?
I have no idea what you're saying. The 1NC didn't make any of those claims.
You just read.
The 1NC also didn't make a TVA. That's essentially a new 2NC counter plan, like position.
It's
Like,
constructive.
hopefully you don't do that.
Okay, so
that's
your
bad.
answer to the
but,
TVA is that the 1NC didn't have it. Makes
well,
sense.
no,
Okay.
I think you
Uh,
also
I'm-
didn't listen to the feel bad offense. Like there were like 3 subpoints on the TVA. I can reread the 2AC
Yeah.
if you'd like.
Okay.
to.
Your counter interpretation, Rev v. Rev debates. What does that look like? And yeah, can you
Oh,
explain
yes,
what that looks
wait.
like?
The Sagino evidence is straight gas. It should be critical methods that forward black and brown practices for understanding like either A, state engagement, or B, how we can look at the resolution.
What do other
So-
debaters? So like 2 things. First, what do debaters like me who don't want to talk about identity in the space, who feel
Yeah,
safe?
you don't have to talk
What am
about
I supposed to
identity.
do?
You can read like Bataille, you can read Baudrillard, you can read like non-violence.
So I have to read like a ton of white guys who yap incessantly about French postmodernism. That's my
You don't
only
have
option.
to read Pomo. I gave you one example
Okay,
of Brown.
so
if you
it's
think
either
that
I have to
debate,
talk about identity, which is
no,
which I find
come
that's
near.
it.
If you
Okay.
will let me finish the question, like answering your question, I will answer it. You can read the Sagino evidence. It says like if someone reads a thesis of violence, you can read non-violence. If someone reads identity politics,
What does
you
this
can read
mean?
on cap identity politics is bad for joining the party.
I'm
if
the
you
t-
want to read, if someone reads white Pomo, say white Pomo is bad and then
I'm the
explain
2A.
why.
What am I supposed to do?
What do you mean? You're the one end too. Like LOL.
Yes,
question
I'm
mark?
asking about debaters who do not want to affirm like anti-Brown and like identity politics.
We
debaters
think
who don't
that
want to
all
affirm
strategies
postmodern.
should be revolutionary in securing liberation for people who have been marginalized. The way that you come to a thesis of understanding of that can be different. It does not have to center
Okay.
identity. Our AF has done that because we think that is the best way to allow people to engage IPR. You can read postmodernism.
Okay.
You can read nonviolence. You can read Tiffany King, who talks about the plantation absent identity. You can read plenty of
Yeah,
other.
I want to move on to my next question.
Well,
Scriptocentrism.
yeah.
Like I don't get why you don't link back to defining norms of methodology. You've just presented a
No,
counter.
this card says that critical interpretations are bracketed out, aka your confusion on the
So
Sagino
why did we
question.
bracket out your critical interpretation?
Well, the card,
Why did we bracket your critical interpretation of the resolution?
yeah, the 1NC, aka the definitions that you've read about how the topic should be approached, do not allow for critical consensus on the affirmative and negative.
Okay,
That is
so it's
why the
about
1NC did
not
not have a
allowing the 1NC.
TVA or a switch side debate. That is why you said that the United States federal government is, obviously legal branches. That is why you said strengthening protection
All
cannot
right, 10
happen from a
minutes, starting
desettlement praxis.
750. Sending the doc. Orders T.
Fairness and clash, or just
Nope.
okay.
Just Can you pass me a stamp? Just a couple cards. Let me know when everyone gets them.
Oh yeah, one sec. Okay, I just got it. Give me a sec to download it.
Cool.
Good to.
Debate is a game that necessitates competitive equity. One, intrinsic good. Fairness is a fundamental moral axiom. Reasonable induction guides moral calculus directing actions based on collective assent. Hold it to the same standard as the app's impact. Suffering is bad because it means people suffer, so unfairness is similarly bad, self-evidently. Two, paradoxical. Sidelighting it is absurd when the apps agree to evaluate doing line by line and going for chopped arguments. Even if we lose everything else, though, because fairness is prerequisite to evaluating their arguments. Presume against truth, absent rigorous testing. Three, value to life. We pour hours into debate when we're already busy deleting yet prep. Throws that out the window, turning debate into a grueling, hopeless nightmare. Causes defeated moral agency and psychic burnout. That's Golchowski. Reconciling with the settler state is only possible if people stay in the activity, so burnout turns research we meet is wrong. They don't use the USFG. They dropped all our definitions. US legal Ellsworth says that the Reds needs to be legislative political action based in DC, which they explicitly do not do. Protecting the Mandela evidence is bad. It's just there are indigenous rights owners and saying they're not as more homogenizing. Even if there's some, even if a lot are denied IPR, that's a unique disclaimer for why you can read those as on this topic or critique them on the next. Now, form versus content distinction is irrelevant. One, no link. We don't exclude important parts of the form of the one you see. Your cards don't say I'm not reading the plan is key. Just that desettling and not it doesn't establish an affirmative win condition. Even if they don't read a plan, they shouldn't have to win that. So I'll do that more below. Second is that it's still unfair. If form is content, we can't debate the uncontestable form of not reading the plan. That means you should evaluate the benefits of the refutable aspects of the one he sees content, not its uncontestable form. Now the counter-interpret is rev debate deletes debatability. One, refutation. Abstains for truisms like equity good or violence bad, which are uncontestable and uncontroversial, undermining the whole point of the Reds. That turns their impacts because running to the moral high ground forces the negative to defend violent positions like racism bad as a generic. Two, arbitrariness, waving fiat plain text in favor of nebulous advocacies, Dex ground, even if that seem closer to the resolution or no Eastern escape because one he sees will not forward a consistent vision of their arguments, and proven how they knowingly clog in the 2AC by saying we don't spill up to the new patent litigation that even though they said that they need to edit or change the patent system as per 1AC cross-links, and they even said repetitive reality, and they still don't defend the effects of that spill up, which would be changing patent legislation. Three, predictability or evidence on these a vision of the topic which all debaters can actively prepare for. It's key to generics like patents bad, clog, prizes, taxes, etc. That preserves limits, not limiting the agent and process for 1ACs, results in the need to prepare for millions of apps, which are structurally impossible. It also means asserting resolution debate means we're not prepared to debate this app in this round. Now they say we have ground from KVK debate. One, it's unpredictable. Even if ground is sitting in articles on the internet, it's unreasonable to fix every negative to cut every card in existence. We can't access that ground unless debates are about the res, because that ground will be concessionary, restricts fairness. Two is that it's uncontroversial. The res facilitates negative reputation. There's interest run to the margin. Where applet is always favored against any ground that we can find. The perm is OP, and KVK debates because they're bound to nothing. Three is that team makes them good. Insofar as there is fairness in those debates, it only exists because teams feel an obligation to stay closer to the resolution in fear of T. Otherwise, they'd say we affirm 2 + 2 = 4 and move on with their day. At the end of Sophocles, evidence says fiat is not resolution, only job the definition of should that says it compels an action to be taken by the USFG, so it is resolutional. They say the scripto centrism just add one, no link. T is a negotiation, not a colonial imposition. Defining words does not assume that everyone interprets the res in the most legalistic manner, but that research rather than personal belief should guide prep. To win this, Coppell must not only prove that legal definitions are bad, but that evidence interprets are bad. Two, essentialist. This argument boils down to saying native people cannot understand complicated or simply just written language, which is more racist. Scripto centrism in general doesn't argue that writing as it just argues that writing as the medium should be prioritized over oral speaking, which we're doing in this activity. So no link. They also they're also including cards about IPR on the 1EC, and centering lived experience that causes identity negation, which is more violent. 3 is that universal definitions are good. They're key to common ground. The res is what all debaters can coalesce around for prep. It's probably imperfect, but every definition is legal on a legal topic. Their lack of counter definitions means you should be highly skeptical of assertions of multiple readings of the res, and disregarding any ascribed meaning causes worse violence because offensive terms will be categorized as personally not offensive for the oppressor. At worst, reject the definitions, not the interpretation. It's equally as arbitrary to prefer our unevidenced reading of the res if you kick the legal definitions, which are centering predictably around personal intuition, makes debates irresolvable. Punishment of the crime. Punitive paradigms are infinitely restive, but rejecting the definitions sends a strong enough signal and creates a favorable time trade-off. Also, go to tab solves any in-round microaggression that they might spin this to be in the 1AR. Read it and lose also solves. You can keep reading your out, but we shouldn't be burned with the joiner of it. You can interpret the res however you want, and we're not imposing that onto you. Across apply all this to the Martha evidence is the same argument, but Martha is also about defining civilizations and states, which is not what we've done. Now, there's no impact to this, even if the right fair engagement is prerequisite to accessing political strategies and subjectivity shift, and this ballot spills over is 0. Only if we win this, only evaluate this round. 1, empirically, nothing links the kind of debate you choose to the kind of person you become. Debaters have gone for the cap game, worked for hedge funds, or argued for climate policy, then argued against climate policy, then became climate activists, school friends, and the next 50 years of our lives outweighs a few years of debate. 2, recoil debaters internalize losses as technical failures and do not research your app more. If anything, will research in response to your apps for worldview changes. It's in the opposite direction. That's the no bias card. 3, attachment fails. We sit guides in a good arm position. Teams go for incorrect arguments like warm and good, knowing it's scientifically mugged. 4, other debates stump. Thousands of rounds occur simultaneously. Each K team preaching a different version of the topic. Every empiric about community practice is non-verifiable and originated at the college, not high school level, so it's not analog. Evaluate solvency consequentially. Anything else devolves into tautology, or is it self-consequentialist and attempting to set a signal even though it doesn't, causes cruel optimism and white guilt dissuasion, which turns their offense. The Rosenblatt is their only subjectivity card, but it's really bad. It says the law has the capacity to change behavior and belief. This round does not change the law, nor is topicality an imposition of any legal system, but it's about literal, quote, civil and criminal prohibitions, not one argument amongst thousands in debate, no hierarchy of expression, because a topical version solves their knowledge production. It's about squirrel copyright exclusions with the African remedy. A couple of examples. 1, the United States federal government should spend $50 trillion and deploy the entirety of the U.S. military to protect Led Zeppelin copyright. It solves because it drop kicks the federal government and subsequently allowing decolonization to fill in. 2, is the United States federal government should bring IP to the commons, which stops U.S. and USFG encroachment on indigenous knowledge production. They should reach out on Stallman. Obviously we get new arguments. It's a 2NC. It's the constructive debate 101. So reject at first framing. It's about education, individualizing indigenous students. No one in this room belongs to that indigenous group, so there's no impact. Unsettling is also inevitable. If they want to, they can not read enough defending state action. We just shouldn't lose. Regardless, one instance of saying the state is good or defending the state does not constitute a quotidian affirmation. No one can affect everyday affirmation of the state, otherwise it's taken out by every other educational system affirming the state. Now they say fairness is an internal link. It's not. I explain that more in the overview. It's an impact in and of itself and remedy and a procedural violation remedy by your decision one way or the other. They say it's inevitable. Those are structural and irresolvable by ballot. Our impacts procedural, which is just saying don't prioritize structural fairness because it becomes a personal Olympics, which is worse, and it's also not solvable by ballot. And I explain why consequentialism is good. Above, they say they don't critique all norms of fairness, but they have done line by line, and which at least proves that they want fair evaluation in this round. The Kolachowski evidence is not unique for minority debaters. That's it's a linear impact, so more is worse. So even if minority debaters are burned out now, the unfairness can still make it worse, and they have to be -2, which turns their impact also leaving us not unique. Again, linear impact answered above. They say predictability. I answered natural limits above. There's none that actually are solvent or predictable. They say community consensus. It's not predictable. We can't go into the community. There's no tangible community consensus, but the only thing we can access is the resolution. They say ground. They say their ground is better. Again, I answered that above. It's not predictable or fair, so we won't research it in fairness terms. Research because there's no incentives to learn an unfair game. They say the staticity side. The Mukherjee evidence links back to them because they're more predictable for themselves, because they only have to prep 2 blocks, but also some amount of predictability is good because the key to fairness is subjectivity. Stuff above, they're not being totally unpredictable because they're recycling KF blocks as it. They've read for years. They say ground policy Fs are unpredictable. No, there's no check by generics, and if they're so unpredictable, we'll go for T against them too. The ground list entered above. The pick stuff don't solve because they'll just change 1AC words, and then perms obviously beat them. Because they're unbeatable. There's also very little offense. If they could just shift out of arbitrarily not defend anything. They say it's not concessionary. It was concessionary because they granted new arguments in the 2EC for why that was the case. Rosenblatt answered above. SSD will be the one.
Are you good?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things that are intrinsic to debate. Why is fairness the key internal link to structuring all of debate?
We don't say it structures all debate, but we do think it's good within the game.
Okay. chaos continue to be read, why hasn't debate collapsed, or why hasn't that linear impact?
It's not again, our argument's not debate collapsing, but procedural unfairness and procedurally unfair decisions, right?
I'm
the
asking
more decisions makes us more burned out. We're reading studies, so agreed.
You've said the Glozewski evidence is a linear process.
Mhm.
Examples in the Glozewski evidence of people leaving.
I mean, it's not a study about debate, obviously, but it is a study about procedural unfairness and decisions, literally.
Wait, so why does procedural unfairness in a card that doesn't talk about debate apply to a very specific format?
Because when people the specific format still involves decisions, a winner and a loser, which the Galchewski evidence does assume.
Wait, so if I read a card about Monopoly, let's take the Warren 11 card about unfairness, that would equally apply?
No, I mean there are other.
Why not?
The Warren 11 card is not a study, and study actually,
well,
or actually, it is a study. It is a study, but it goes the other way, and we have a rehighlight if you read it. So.
Well, okay, so basically it doesn't matter if it's about
no,
evidence
our argument is
being
about procedural
debate.
fairness, Warren's about structural unfairness. So.
Yeah, I'm just confused about the internal link in the card, but that's fine. You said that fairness is good because it's not unfair, and unfairness is bad because fairness is good. I'm kind of confused why this is not taught.
Yeah, so in the same way that there's some things are intrinsically good. We can't prove moral value statements like we can prove the Pythagorean theorem, but some things, for all moral coherence to make sense, have to be true. Suffering is bad because it means people suffer, axiomatically, intrinsically. Unfairness is bad
if you
because
slapped
it's
me
unfair.
and Ayush, that wasn't unfair. We both got slapped. Is that not bad?
Again, there are other reasons why things can be bad or good, like suffering. So
then why
slapping
does fairness outweigh
slapping,
that suffering?
Slapping you and Ayush would both be bad because it proliferates suffering, right? But there are other intrinsic goods, right?
Okay,
Fairness,
great. There are
suffering.
other intrinsic goods,
right,
obviously.
But so not all are remediable.
Bad.
Post hoc by a ballot. So if we slapped you both, then on voting for you would.
Okay, judges put things at the top
that.
of their paradigm you can't read racist arguments, etc. If fairness is the key internal link for debate, why do judges put this at the top of their paradigm?
I can't get
we'll
into
stop
every
the
judge's
round.
mind. I agreed.
No, but judges.
If people do read
there's
again,
a community consensus that judges
that's
don't
our
allow
argument.
racist
Our argument is that racist microaggression shouldn't be debated out, but tab and other interventions.
Okay, when you go to tab tells the judge, tell us what happened. How does this stop the onus from being on the judge to evaluate whether something happened or not?
Well, they'll relay what happened in the debate, and if you're
tab
right,
doesn't make a decision. The judge still makes a decision. Tells tab that.
I mean, I don't think that's true. If you think their
microaggression,
if your microaggression is so egregious, then yes, they will certainly. If someone said a slur in round, tab would certainly stop the round.
No, the judge stops the round, makes that decision, but that's fine.
No,
do teams read procedural fairness multiple times?
What do you mean? Do they read it multiple times?
Do you read procedural fairness against every KF?
I mean, they can, not all.
No. I'm asking about you. Do you read procedural fairness multiple times?
Yeah, there are multiple things that are unfair. Yes.
Okay. So
and we read against policy.
So every time. Okay. Yeah.
So, I'm sending it out.
Prep.
It's kind of looking up from.
Stop prep. That's a minute. We have a 7:19.
What's the order? I'm gonna give it a sec. I'm sending it.
Oh, one second.
Case, framework, Wuwe, Capke, clog, and then the frame subtraction pick.
Is the order on framework just?
I'm
It's
finishing whatever your most
like
is.
TBA.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Case, Wuwe or framework, Wuwe, the Capke, Claw. Pick.
The cards on framework are in the 2NC.
So there's no doc?
Yeah, it just
No, the one in our doc is separate. I was just
I think there's just
for the
one
for
card,
the
actually.
framework card.
Oh wait, let me download the one on our doc.
Yeah, okay. No, wait, he's gonna read
Yeah,
the 2NC.
he'll read the 2NC cards.
Okay, okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Can you use that? Okay, I'm good.
Okay. I am. The 1DC was an ideological double turn. They've written arguments about why the state is bad and why it can't be reformed, but then their own evidence says that we need to reform the copyright system and doctrine through the state. If they're right that the resolution causes violence through the imposition of copyright, then they create cruel optimism for indigenous communities because they deny the existing capacities at hand that their own evidence advocates. Here's their 1AC evidence by Basazi and Cardenas 24. Here's the conclusion of the card. Reforming fixation is a small step towards removing hierarchies embedded in cultural production. Copyright doctrine should be adapted to accommodate the uniqueness of indigenous cultural heritage. Fixation should be reformed in a way to protect intangible heritage. Through desettling, we may find a way to promote and protect the works of those who excluded through the copyright system. This is embarrassing. Their own 1AC evidence advocates protection of IPR, which means the TVA most certainly solve. Here's the text. The United States federal government should reform fixation for cultural production to protect intangible heritage. And we don't even need to win this state as good or can be used for good because there are others who say it's necessary, which takes out the entirety of the case rate and takes out the legal definition CAs, and because the imposition of the state isn't bad, it's good because it prevents copyright, and just the definitions are good because it prevents copyright. The lens of settler closed is counterproductive and structural and analytic. Using it turns case. One obscures contingency, collapsing all relation possibility into the settler native binary is the reduction inaccurate. There are multiple specificities that operate outside this or simultaneously inside and out. Their totalizing typology forecloses a dynamic understanding of history, which ensures misguided practice. 2 is fatalism. Their impact claim presumes there's a unified omnipresent settler logic constantly lurking, even without a concrete evidence to support the claim that puts politics to death by perversely concluding that their huge portion of social and political transformations are simulationist or genocidal when they're actually empowering to create a false drive for countercultural and unpromising decolonization that they themselves know is essentially unachievable, which makes indigenous liberation impossible. Framework doesn't give them a uniqueness. Our term doesn't profit of indigenous appropriation, driven by the TVA. Indigenous individuals can and do get IP in the squad, proving that it can be good. The idea that they don't and they can't is totalizing and essentialist, proven by the fact that indigenous people and indigenous communities frequently do get IPR, especially over traditional knowledge in other countries through the TRIPS agreement, but they have the topic research and they don't know that in the United States, indigenous people can get certain forms of copyright, and rejection of the resolution is not the threshold for solvency, proving the 1AC and its method was good. Vote negative on presumption. The 1AC does nothing. It pathologizes past instances of desettlement that have already been done and resolve the impacts like the 2AC's examples of resistance. The threshold for breeding presumption is not that the winning the 1AC's method is good in the abstract, but the performance and method done by Coppell is distinct from past instances of desettlement. A is pathology. Every single example they give is a negative argument, as it proves the 1AC's method is already being done, but they pathologize those very examples by saying they're not good enough. B, cruel optimism. They give violent accounts of settler colonialism without any material politics against those structures. They give no blueprint for what the 1AC does, how it does that, why that solves, and when that does get exported out of debate. These questions must be answered, otherwise they recreate the same forms of exhaustion they seek to solve by assuming mere performative utterances of violence are enough to solve their impact. Reps don't treat reality. Saying something doesn't cause it. The audience is profoundly influenced by features that's empirically proven by other policies not happening because of representations. That's our Goddard and Krebs evidence. Go to framework. SSD isn't reactionary. You can introduce an all that proactively rejoins topical action. It solves this if the state is a poor locus of action. We'll learn that by losing to the movement's counterfeit or state bad K on the neg. TVA often doesn't apply. Reading a topical app doesn't violently affirm the state, and their VRK doesn't apply. Both are about a model of debate. The Tweezy missed the boat on her interpretation. They're free to read whatever they'd like, but that doesn't establish an app win condition. They can read it and lose. 1 is no link. Fiating state action is pessimistic. It criticizes the state for inaction now. Our model doesn't bind all agencies to state. It contingently uses the state to create balanced debates. 2 is turn. Smucker. Proceed to read about restructuring religion, all or nothing movement, or horizon is for the former. Then what do we have to research overcoming obstacles? The way do we make constitutions for to improve condition for all? Why put a bandit on a gapping mood if we imagine changes horizon which we orient? A vision may be used as long as it grounds us in struggle now. Today, organizations tend to win no victories, especially such efforts does not make one revolutionary pluralism of fatalism and abstract politics that emerges from privilege. Any improvement in situation people is dismissed as prolonging the system. Nothing can measure utopian standards. This is not to suggest we give up on structural change. The problem here is not radicalist. The problem is an all or nothing thinking about change. In the meantime, if society were to collapse, why would society reconstruction in a way that differs from the structure of the revolutionary movement will not ascend? And you link to the ass critique of the state still situates the state as an actor of policymaking, feasting its legitimacy in the TVA, and switch side also answer it. Wait. We never said lingering is key to subjectivity. We said it's key to relationality, which is categorically different, which is what Russell and I was trying to say. And new articulations of cross-applications justify new answers. Cap K can see the parent test competition. Stuff on case prove there's no exclusion. If they cross-apply to framework, we get new answers. And the stuff on case proves materiality is good. And they haven't. Our interpretation doesn't necessarily include or necessitate materiality. You can also read affirmatives like Derrida that have hard left offense. Go to Claude. TJ conceded the link proves a violation on framework. If the 1 AR pivots to increasing and strengthening IPR and the WIMI, then they conceded it overburdens the courts who are guardians of the environment. It causes climate change, which hurts indigenous people as well. It's in the squirrel hurting indigenous people, which means no links to critique of Utah and is independently bad. Drop the link in link turn, which takes out 2EC and 2 and 3. And the pick concede the perm test competition. They said it's good, so there's no reason to reject the T.
Back to T.
Back to T.
Process fill-in is...
Process fill-in is good. It's resolutional.
And it's process conflicts don't compete.
And they don't compete.
Hey, how much did we have left?
719.
Or 718, actually. Yeah.
Then I'm Alright. 357 left. How can I get this thing?
No cards.
Cool.
Order B.
Settler colonialism has infiltrated the debate space and the government protection is impossible for the indigenous body absent an analytic of desettlement and interrogation rather the push towards copyright and patent law naturalize the history of dispossession, murder, thievery, and white commodification of native material knowledge, voting affirmatives, a rupture in which knowledge you choose to let in and associate with the topic. That's Rosenblatt's time and evidence. No double turn cross apply the TVA offense from above, but it's a question of how we change the copyright doctrine. The app is a prerequisite conversation to another policy action because the app is a prerequisite conversation to another policy action, which is the resolution that the app substantiates. Even if you don't believe that, Ion, read the Steinman evidence is phenomenal. They dropped that we're not totalizing. We're optimistic about the indigenous strategies overcoming violence and indigenous political engagement from the bottom up being possible. The TRIPS evidence, the U.S. blocked it till we added provisions that we didn't have to be behold to it, and they didn't answer any of our warrants about spill up. The Rosenblatt evidence, I send it here. It says that every iteration against settled norm-shaped behavior in academia that means debates against norms like framework ones are essential to our subject information, which you don't get in policy v policy debates, which means none of the no evidence even applies with Sherman dogma signs and says that even if it's wrong with large, it's true for desettlement specifically because it changes the ways in which we learn. It's literally desettlement as a process of learning which shapes the ways that we understand indigenous subjectivities. That doesn't answer that, and double down is their only offensive claim on subjectivity, and you should reject it because it's essentially saying that they'll keep being racist, which you shouldn't vote for on T. Extend the counterinterpretation of KVK debates around IPR. That's non-state-based strategies that combat structural issues that are not institutional reform. It's all best because settler colonialism and its infiltrated debate. That's all of our evidence. It proves the most agential capacity to combat it. That's the Seguino evidence. It's also all the limits and predictability offense because it's still linked to IPR and encourages clash. We met the debates, which is more predictable because it's grounded in 2 decades of critical literature and hold the line on extrapolation because they have engaged in our model defaults, competing interpretations. Anything else is arbitrary in a debate about debate, and not engaging with the counter model means that they concede chaos. Skip that. Now, it should be about models, not this specific round. Multiple reasons. One is guilt dissuasion, thinking that this specific round stops all chaos from being read is wrong. Russell agreed that fairness is scalar, that this one round doesn't have an impact, but increases the propensity for it to prioritize voting for an actual impact, not just increasing the propensity for something. A model of debate that actually causes people to desettle academia, etc. is better. 2, if the competition overcodes debate, then ballots are the only way to create teaching moments or affirm ideas that should be read more. 3, historical analysis proves that ballots are signaling effects. A model of debate can be prioritized. 4, the act of reading topicality violation is a question what the debate space should be used to, as they represent models and fairness as impact to model proven by the fact that they said that they should read procedural framework multiple times. It's just this round. There's no impact to voting F because all the fairness and context of what a model of unfair debates is. So it obviously is now the line by line on the counterinterpretation. They said truisms. No, you have to defend any debate about a method to resolve things like racism and queerphobia, etc. 2, they said it's unpredictable. No natural limits. Checks back against unpredictability. Most K literature can be grouped into certain schools of thought. They said the limits and predictability. Group it. Ground outweighs. Cat, pest, psycho, etc. All generics that answer all the unlimited chaos that they talked about. So unpredictable and limits don't matter. Their only answer that the perm is OP. 1, it's not true. KVK debates leans negative. UDLs and college debate proves, and they have no warrant for it because Russell's never done KVK debate. They said identity politics is bad. You don't have to go for identity arguments. Stop reducing K debate to racism bad. We just argue that there are other ways to engage in affirming the state-based strategies. They said we only stay close to the resolution because it's proven wrong by UDLs. Revolutionary debate is centered around IPR. It just changes the ways that we engage with it through non-state-based strategies. The dissatisfied Simon evidence here. You've dropped the role of the ballot extend Simon, which is that settlement is a conscious affirmation of breaking down settler institutions at every opportunity. It's a practice in mundanity. Refuse to drop in the budget logic because it's a tactic of whiteness used to cover up discomfort and guilt. Framework is a desperate attempt to retain the settler state's authority because it's comfortable and known, but we should take a stance with indigenous knowledge because our social location, communication, and reality is distorted by colonialist production agency is tied to active choice that you make. Framework is a choice, so voting So is voting out. There's 2 impacts of return class and fairness. 1 is exclusion of indigenous people and their knowledge is unvisibilized by the university, so you don't know settler colonialism is occurring, especially in educational spaces. 2, genocide, forgetting sanitizes our hands of the problem, and green lights clearing of land to death in the real world, or otherwise we are actively devaluing indigenous experiences. Their only answer was that 1, that the affirmation of the state is not a quotidian challenge. Yes, it is. That was everything above. Now, switch side and TVA debate. None of it matters if it's just about this debate because we can't reverse time, but if it is a model debate, which obviously you would vote F on, it's wrong. First, switch side. Being F is keeper an unconditional critique of the resolution which spreads counter-discursive hegemonic norms. That's big hard 20. Then 2, people linked to the form of the 1AC and read cross-counter plans, etc., which moves the focus away from content. The 2AC was 1 on the cross-counter plans, and the fact that they can read itself is bad even if they're not competitive because that is what the debate becomes about. Their example about how everyone goes through theory, everyone loses to negative critiques. 1, under your model, they destroy debate because no one breaks. That means the app now is key to preserve debate. But 2, winning on the negative just means that you disagree with the app, not the resolution. So it's not a signaling effect. The TVA debate extend the disad counter cross-apply it here. 2, reinvesting into hope as as a policymaker, that none of us will actually be able to recreate the notion that the only way for people to help themselves through the state, which is bad. The fairness stuff, first they said fairness and intrinsic good, disproven by cross-section when they said debaters are only valuable if they are valid, which means that we win. The topical debates are valid, we win. Fairness is just an internal link. The fairness paradox is wrong because it's wrong because we haven't said that things like speech times, etc., are the same as norms because we follow rules. That burnout stuff, if the Ash thesis solves burnout because KDK debates are energizing.
Okay, 750.
TKs. Have this now. Thank you. Good.
TKs?
Yeah. Coppell. This might not be as banger as a Militant or Neil 2-R, but Coppell drops way too much offense on KVK for the 2-AR to be viable. Drop truth testing fairness is prerequisite to evaluating their arguments. They rely on it, they did line to line, and they'll go for dropped arguments expected to flow by forfeiting fair procedure. They also forfeit the ability for their arguments to be rigorously tested, preclude any determination about the veracity of their claims to structure every argument. We can't know if T is exclusionary, if Bouts shape minds, or if T should be evaluated based off a model if those arguments themselves are not rigorously tested because they were unfair. So fairness is functionally you link, you lose. Now it was clearly flagged into the paradox that the implication of their following fair norms is that we should only evaluate their arguments if they meet the fairness threshold test. So it's certainly prerequisite now, but there's also a huge external impact of fairness which outweighs its irrefutably impact, and certainly more than just an internal link. There's a reason Coppell expects you to flow diligently treat dark arguments it's true and not inject your political proclivities into your RFD. There's a reason that if you egregiously divorce from those fair norms, then Coppell will be justifiably angry and post-round. That reason is fairness. Both sides rely on it because it's foundational to all morality, including racism, which means it matters. It's also the only impact your vow can resolve, because when a team violates fair procedure, you can quickly remedy that violation by not issuing that team a ballot. The counter, they drop too much offense on here to access fairness versus arbitrariness. The app lacks a plan, voiding any way to tie them to one policy. Proven in this debate how the 2EC no linked clog, even after describing a spill-up claim to how they might change the court system where the patent appeal process or the copyright appeal process for indigenous people. Method does not solve, because there's what constitutes a method is itself vacuous and arbitrary, because there's no plan takes or under if it is evaluated based off a model, then a model doesn't even necessitate a plan text, just a method in general, which is worse. But in this round they no link clog, which is bad. There's also a predictability offense. They have dropped the debaters prep in the context of the resolution, and they've dropped all of our definitions that they avoid USFG, that eliminates all ground from politics, econ, clog, etc. So that is an in-round violation that overcomes their defense. Now they say in-round they say models first to top level. They drop evaluates will have consequentially. Anything else evolved into tautology or is itself consequentialist, so only evaluate what the ballot can do, not what you want it to do. Now multiple dropped warrants first is that other round stump. Thousands of rounds occur simultaneously, so there's zero chance that one individual one say March round 2 is going to spill up to change all of debate. And 2 is that in 2 is recoil debaters internalize losses as technical failures and do not research your AVMOR, and they also that's the no vice evidence citing studies, which is preferable to their assertions, their evidence. They drop that their evidence is about changing the law itself, which they cannot do. And so they don't change any colonial structures in debate anyway. They say reject racism. That might sound rhetorically sound, but remember that we're not saying we were racist, but also it's inevitable if they're right that you should not vote for that saying don't vote for racists is a deontological claim, not a consequential one. If we're right that it results in more racism happening, then under their frame it is desirable. Guilt dissuasion is also neg. They force white judges to wash their hands of racism by voting on imaginary model that will never be actualized. They say competition shapes valid, still incentivizes to change our blocks, not our practices or minds. Signal is stumped to the above. T is not itself a model. Remember our 1 and C violation. The neg need not rejoin. Affirmatives did not restrain the protection of IPR. And so in this round we do not we should not be rejoined against them. So it's not about a model, nor does it beg a question of a model, because we're only going for in-round offense on the KVK stuff proper. We didn't just say the perm is OP, but all the arbitrariness stuff implicates that, but also they drop the team makes those debates good insofar as there is fairness in KVK debates. Those are only possible when teams stay close to the resolution at all, which their interp doesn't necessitate, but also it's concessionary, which wrecks fairness because can't prep in the pre-round based off their 1EC. We couldn't prep specific links to specific dissets or K arguments, which internally turns all their ground recycle all the cap stuff. Also, also I will extend those loose to the perm because they just said I haven't been in any KVK debates, but logically KVK is the AF has much higher win rate because Kavnir's also been them, and he's telling me that the AF is an insane win rate, and the reason why they do is because there's nothing you can tie them to, which is worth it. Simon decided to drop T as a negotiation, not a colonial imposition. We've reached an impasse of how we interpret the resolution, so the only way we can reconcile those two is by negotiating about the meaning of words and definitions. They've also dropped our read and lose argument that our interpretation is not that they have to change whatever they want. They can read whatever they want from round to round, even in this debate, so we're not excluding them. No, but we just think that we should not lose because they did. They have not established the necessity for an affirmative win condition based off their reading their affirmative, just their method being desirable in this round, which also answers the genocide argument, or switch side also switch side also answers this because we're not, it's not reactionary because they can still read their F on the neg, and same with the TBA, which they basically drop, bring IP to the comments. It's not they drop the fiat good offense, so the intrinsic good fairness stuff wasn't really didn't make sense. The 1AR, they just said there's no violation. We're not going for speech. We're not going for speech times, obviously. Case. No spill up, drop their performance, pathologizes current activists, and creates cruel optimism. They reinvest in cruel optimism, investment hope, entity settlement without explaining how, why, and when it works. That means they can only pathologize current movements that are not enough. That was 30 seconds of the 1AR drop. Negative presumption means A, spill up only causes more violence because it creates more violence. B, that spill up is impossible because they don't create a new plan or how they methods out its place. Hold the line, the 1AR was 0 on this flow. So no spill up.
357. Wait, actually, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. me one second. Get my computer started. Okay, 357. Can I have the
Yeah.
stamp? Thanks. Cool. Theater will be case and then a framework. MBA has lost its debate where they dropped all the ballot signaling offense when MBA BM lost to Coppell DR twice. Aiden Barnett went out and cut the non-violence case. The same with Dartmouth SV, who went for case against chaos because that is the best form of engagement, and ballots can endorse that. Russell has done a great job technically on the line by line, but has 0 ballot key warrants for the negative beyond a questionable fairness violation. Protection is impossible for the indigenous body absent an analytic of desettlement, and that naturalizes a history of dispossession theory and commodification of indigenous knowledge as it's assimilated into IPR. This is all on the spill up debate, which is the Rosenblatt 19 evidence about how discourse in here about the law can reshape the way that we think about copyright systems, which is a prerequisite to investing in politics. They said that we are cruel optimism, but no, all of this stuff in the 1AC, the desettlement evidence is all about how we already starting point 2 access that, which is not cruel optimism, but an internal link turns the idea that state-based politics, aka the entire model of debate that they have forwarded in their interpretation, is an impact turn to. It's the negative presumption, obviously not. I answered all of that above, but also the Rosenblatt evidence are specific cards that says way A, like talking about the law forms a discourse that wields power over behaviors and beliefs, which is also a term we'll take out to all of the subjectivity debate, but also the law can identify some behaviors as admirable and others as shameful, and it also provides the official social text that shapes activities and brands them as legitimate or illegitimate. That means that voting on T and this debate brands certain activities and certain forms of debate as legitimate or illegitimate. Go to T proper. Even if you think that fairness is a terminal or a model explodes limits, it does not matter because star this on your flow every single ballot. Actualize the model. All topicality violations are questions of how we should use debate as a set of education or what provides the best mode of engagement for the app, which was also dropped in the 2NR. You are lying to yourself if the ballot does not guide community consensus. This was the 2AR, the 2AC, and 1AR about how if everyone kept losing on framework, they would not read it. Double down is untrue. Debate is overcoded by competition, which takes out all the recall evidence, and the novice evidence is not specific to debate. But also, if every time you go to neg against the chaos, it's people would stop reading chaos if competition is true, and we're conceding that internal link. It's never a question of individual ballots, but what they can signal. It's not who did the better debating, but whose ideas are better over the course of a season, line by line. The reason to reject models: 1, consequentialism, i.e., what the ballot does. The competition above proves that ballots do nothing to stop chaos from being read or remedy a violation, because just because we agree debate is about debate. Also, the other round stump is if NBA HM loses round 2 of St. Mark's, that is a pretty powerful signal. If it is about this one debate, you said that you can only evaluate what the ballot does. That was the framing at the top of the 2AR. The paradox is untrue. We've only read dissents to certain practices. We have not read dissents to flowing or evaluating the round fairly, but rather the way that their framework interpretation brackets out chaos. They said that yes, you should fairly evaluate this debate absent any prior notions. That means you should not lean neg on framework either. That means, and 2, recoil is wrong because competition is key. That means people will change 3. Guilt assuasion flips app because they have no reason the ballot stops. It's framework reading the app. The signaling is verifiably true. Also, the internal link turn on guilt assuasion. The fact that reading it was saying that it's just about this one debate and then leaving the app behind is also bad. Rather, you should affirm a model debate that allows for the most minority engagement or liberation strategies. That was all the stuff on the counter interpretation. There's more defense. They dropped that fairness as a sliding scale. Some things are more or less fair than others. Therefore, our model is best for fairness over the course of a season. That means any impact turn or counter models obviously win. It means you vote out because the ballot can't affirm that. The counter model here it solves all offense. The signal evidence is simply better than any of they can produce in this hyper-specific debate. For example, clash happens under our model proved by debates such as folk economics versus the cap K, motive versus wilderness, and violence versus non-violence, set call, queer press, etc. And I'll get really topic specific. Set call debates about a reorientation of what protection means, aka this, versus passivity, critical fabulations of what protection can look like versus passive. Big framing issue here is they simply asserted we don't have sufficient class without doing that. They said that we dropped truth testing. No, you have to win T for truth testing to be true for that. And the interpretation, if it's interpretations versus interpretations, obviously it's not just about this app, but rather what model we forfeit. Whereas absent the subjectivity being shifted, you can still vote app because your ballot is still a signal. Absent all of that offense because that is what empirically happens. B, the Rosenblatt and Steinman evidence subsumes this. It says that desettling is an analytic that happens every single day. That means every single academic act, i.e. this space feeds our act consciousness towards action. That means it will shape subjectivity, which is a terminal which is terminal evidence, which they do not have of the reverse way. They said that 2 or 3 on true, that you get to read truisms. That's also untrue. Methods are simply better for any sort of competition. It's not arbitrary because if it's not tied to a policy, rather method. The method is the best. Is better than a plain text because you can read all the examples that I gave above. They said that this round T is what makes those debates good. That is untrue. They dropped UDLs and CETA having a sufficient clash and half of college debate being KVK, which is not grounded in topicality because no one reads T and UDL debates. They also said that the Steinman evidence, their only answer was that it is a negotiation, but that is an answer to the wrong disad. That was for the Lee evidence, but we did not extend that. That is not about Steinman. They said we could read it and lose if competition is true. That means reading it and losing is still a terminal form of exclusion because that means people do not read chaos, even if it's just about this round. And they dropped that community consensus is key. For example, the hypo testing to now, that means ballots do shape the way that we approach the resolution itself, even if fiat or should is part of, even if should means that you fiat the resolution, obviously you can reshape what it means to operate under the resolution. That was the offense about hypo testing moving to like moving away from whole res. And terminally, ground outweighs any answer was that the perm is OP, but that is not true because if you can still get perennial generics like cap and psycho, etc., that means that there is always sufficient engagement that will happen, and that sort of, even if that is more generic engagement versus like politics, counter plans, or like core distats, that is still better because it's method v method debate, which is all the stuff about because you create the best strategies for protection for black and brown folk.
Good debate.